Thanks to all of you who come out. Thanks to you who view the streams. We appreciate your support. We're in Isaiah chapter 48, and we are talking about thou art wearied in the multitude of thy counsels. Oh, yes, I forgot to turn on the fans. Okay. Everyone's a little warm. You can turn on the other side too if you want. All right. Just realized we did not have the fans on. My wife is letting me know. Okay. But when we talk about counsels, there are lots of counsels about all kinds of things. You have school counsels and student counsels and president's counsels and advisory counsels. There are counsels for just about everything, because really a council is just a group of people, and those people may be talking about all kinds of things. You have counseling, a counselor. And when you look at it, it's basically someone or a group that is making advice about something, or perhaps making a decision about something. And when you look at life, there are all kinds of counsels. I just mentioned a few of them right there. But we take counsels in our life often. If there's a decision that needs to be made, we'll often seek for counsel. Think for a moment, a person that's trying to build something, they may seek counsel, whether that's in the form of a video, or whether that's in the form of talking to an expert about it, or even to their friend. They will try to receive counsel. Often people will have counseling in their child's life. They'll try to get advice for a particular situation. Maybe it's maybe a medical situation, or maybe a behavioral situation. They'll seek counsel. Perhaps it's most commonly, I would say it's very common to talk about a marriage counseling, where someone gives counsel in a marriage. Typically, if there's an issue or if there's a decision that has to be made, there may be a counsel. But there is this fact that counseling can become wearisome. When there are so much counsel and so much information and so many differing views, that things can become confusing and even wearisome. If we were to take maybe a hypothetical situation, let's say that there is a person who is receiving counsel about a certain decision, and he goes to a friend about it, and he goes to a family, and he goes to an expert, and then another expert, and then another expert, and he continues to get differing points of view, differing ideals. And then as he's trying to make a decision, there is dissent and conflict to the point where the individual seeking counsel is now wearied. It's an interesting scenario that we have. We have lots of ideals that are being presented in today's society. Perhaps just most recently, there was a very controversial event that took place. Most of you are probably already aware of it, as it hit the news very heavily and was widely condemned, and some people pulled their advertising for the Olympics because there was the promotion of a drag queen style type with the painting of the Leonardo da Vinci and the Last Supper, and replacing it with conflicting ideas and ideologies, and it was condemned widely, as there's over 2 billion people in the world that are listed under Christianity, and there was wide conflict because of it, especially for most of the nations around the world. But there was a counsel being presented. The person that was in charge of the setup, the artistic representation it was called, was the person that was in charge of it from France, could not understand why people were so upset about the depiction. You see, there's all kinds of ideals that are being floated in today's life. And when you go to Isaiah chapter 47, it was no different. There was the country of Babylon, and we've talked about over the last couple weeks the situation that they were in. We look at it, and there was a lot of things going on. There was a lot of immorality that was going on. God had been rejected. They had trusted in their wickedness, we talked about on Thursday evening. And in verse 11, all of a sudden, the whole context of the chapter begins to change, as all of a sudden there becomes a reality that there was a day of reckoning coming. Because in verse 11, it says, "Therefore shall evil come upon thee, and thou shalt not know from whence it riseth, and mischief shall fall upon thee, thou shalt not be able to put it off, and desolation shall come upon thee suddenly, which thou shalt not know." All of a sudden, everything changes. The dynamic changes. Suddenly, evil is coming upon them. They had dwelt carelessly, as it tells us in this chapter. Verse 8 of Isaiah chapter 47 says that they were given to pleasure, that they had dwelt carelessly. And of course, we know, as we talked about on Thursday evening, that they had trusted in their wickedness. This is what was happening. And all of a sudden, what they never realized would become a reality was that there was a God that was in control. And I can tell you this morning that no matter what it looks like in life, there is still a God that's in control. There's a psalm, Psalms chapter 10. It's mostly about the wicked. That's almost the entirety of the psalm. It starts off, "Why standest thou afar off, O Lord? Why hidest thou thyself in times of trouble?" And then it says, "The wicked persecuteth the poor." And then it tells us, "The wicked boasteth of his heart's desire. He blesses the covetousness." It tells us that through the pride of his countenance he will not seek after God. And then we get to verse number 11, where he says in his heart, "God hath forgotten. He hideth his face, he will never see it." You see, it's an interesting thing that happens. We begin to feel like, or maybe even believe, that there's no God that's in control. And so people begin to live their life like there's no God. Because obviously, if you believe there's a God and that he's in control, there's no way you would do something like what happens at the Olympics. If there's a God and you really believe that, there's no way that you'd be able to talk against him and use his name in vain and violate the laws of God. The reality is, we really don't believe there's a God in control, or if he is, we believe he's hiding his face, because we're living our lives like there is no God. And in Babylon, they were doing the same thing. They were living their lives like there was no God. They were living their lives carelessly. They were given to pleasure. They had put their trust in wickedness, and they were living their lives like there was no God. But in verse 11, all of a sudden reality struck. Evil came upon them. It says that they really didn't even know where it was coming from. If you look at history and the fall of Babylon, it's a startling thing. And we looked at it several months ago. The fall of Babylon was a startling thing. It was the strongest nation in the world. It seemed there was no way that it could ever be defeated. During the time of Nebuchadnezzar, pretty much all of the leaders of the world had fallen down and worshipped and trusted in Babylon. But at the time of its fall, Belshazzar is the king of Babylon. Belshazzar is so unaware that there's any trouble or danger that he's literally having a feast. And he's having his feast, and he's using the vessels that were taken out of the temple that was in Jerusalem. He's desecrating the things of God. And all of a sudden, there's a hand that writes on the wall. It's an amazing story. It so shocked Belshazzar that it says his knees smote together. He was so afraid because there was a writing on the wall, a handwriting on the wall, basically the finger of God. And it said, Mene, Mene, Tekel Yopharsin. It's in the book of Daniel. And he sought for all of his wise men to interpret the writing on the wall, to see what it meant. And none of his wise men could tell him. And finally he called upon Daniel. His wife said, there's one of the Hebrews, can interpret dreams and things. We probably should send for him. And Daniel comes in and he interprets the writing for him. And it's an amazing thing. It was that he had been numbered in the balances and found wanting. God had came on the scene and had weighed him in the balances and said, you've been found wanting, and this night thy life shall be required of thee. And it was in that very night the Medo-Persian Empire would come in, take over the nation of Babylon. Why? Because they had rejected God. And we look at verse number 12 and we find this. It says, stand now with thine enchantments and with the multitude of thy sorceries, wherein thou hast labored from thy youth, if so be thou shalt be able to profit, if so be thou mayest prevail. You know, really, right now, we don't know where to turn when there's trouble. We really don't. People aren't sure what they're supposed to believe in. Because what happens when there really is a problem and you really don't have control about it? What do you do? The world really doesn't have an answer for it. We hope those things don't happen. There was an interesting article about a person who had laid up millions for his retirement. This individual is actually a financial advisor. He's wrote hundreds and hundreds of articles about financial advice, and his advice has always been to put back things for when you retire, to live frugally. That way you'll be able to retire in ease. This has been his teaching. This is what he's promoted. This is what he's written. And he has put out all kinds of things about making sure that you retired past 90 and all of these things, and really believed himself that he would live past 90. He'd taken care of his body, he'd taken care of his health, he'd taken care of his finances. But an amazing thing has happened. This man had found out now that he has an advanced form of prostate cancer and only has a few months to live. This man set back millions for his retirement. You know, he was always preparing for the future without realizing, now wait a second, I've no guarantee of a future. You see, there's no guarantee that this world will last for another day. It might, it may not. Someone said this week, and probably accurately so, that we are closer to World War III than we've ever been, and that it could come at any moment because of the tensions that are happening across the world right now. No guarantee of tomorrow, and yet many people live like there is a guarantee, like they're in control. People turn to astrology and horoscopes. The buildings are all across America, places where you can have your palm read, literally right next to where I purchased my car. There is a palm reading place. They'll read your palms and tell you your fortunes. And there's tarot cards and all of these things. We've got hundreds and hundreds of books now about magic and movies about magic and all of these things. Why do we have to talk about magic? It's very simple, because we don't know what to do when things are outside of our control. There are many fairy tales that are out there. You probably know most of them. Cinderella, very common story, a the fairy godmother that would come and magically create a dress and shoes for her. It's the fact that we're always looking for something greater than ourselves. Think of all of the fairy tales, almost all of them come from this. Someone that is in search of something that finds it, and most often it's via some form of magic. Why? Because when you forsake God, the only thing you're left with is magic. You're left with magic. And the reality of the fact is that magic fails. Why? Because for the most part, a lot of it's not real. And the parts that are controlled by the devil. You see, this is what happened in Babylon. They had lost the hope in God. They dwelt carelessly. They were given to pleasure. They trusted in wickedness, and now all of a sudden, the only thing they could turn to when trouble came was to their astrologers, to their wise men, to their counsels. And as I said, Belshazzar turned to them in the time of trouble. The writing on the wall. He turns to his wise men, he turns to his astrologers and found out something. They didn't know what was happening. They didn't know how to get out of their situation. They didn't know what was going on. And so in verse 13 it says, "Thou art wearied in the multitude of thy counsels." People are weary this morning because they don't understand what's happening. They look out and they see trouble on every side. They see problems in our politics, problems in our military situations across the world. There seems to be wars breaking out everywhere. It seems that we're losing control. Inflation is through the roof, and people have nicknamed it different forms of economics. The United States falls deeper and deeper into debt every year. About every 100 days, they say that $1 trillion is added to the debt. We're adding over $3 trillion a year to our national debt, and people are concerned. Social Security seems failing, and Medicare is not far behind. And there are problems. There are problems in our cities. There are crime rates beyond imaginable. The education levels have fallen to very, very poor standards. And so many times we point back to COVID and say that we've not really regained our situation, but many counselors are now saying the problem has nothing to do with education or COVID or any of it. The problem is with our society. All of a sudden, the families have broken down. Marriages are practically non-existent for the most part. It all becomes like a dream, and all of a sudden, people are weary. When evil comes, people become weary because all of a sudden, you'll find something. Be not deceived, God is not mocked. Whatsoever a man soweth, that shall he also reap. There has been a lot of talk, I mentioned it earlier, about the situation that happened in France. But the overwhelming response is, be not deceived, God is not mocked. This morning, the overall response is this: be not deceived, God is not mocked. God does see what's going on. God sees the things happening in your life. The question this morning is, are we dwelling carelessly? Are we given to pleasure? Are we trusting in our wickedness? Are we turning to the multitude of the counsels of this world? Because I'll tell you, eventually you'll find out the world doesn't have the answer. They don't know what to do. And right now, there's a lot of searching. People that are searching for an ideal, for a philosophy, something that will work to get us out of the situation that we're in. Verse 13 says, "Thou art wearied in the multitude of thy counsels. Let now the astrologers, the stargazers, the monthly prognosticators stand up and save thee from these things that shall come upon thee." God says, see what happens. See if anyone can stop the hand of God. And I will tell you, the answer is no one. It says their ideals, their philosophies. It says in verse 14, "Behold, they shall be as stubble. The fire shall burn them. They shall not deliver themselves from the power of the flame. There shall not be coal to warm it, nor fire to sit before it. Thus shall they be unto thee, with whom thou hast labored, even thy merchants from thy youth. They shall wander every one to his quarter. None shall save thee. Here's the reality of the nation and the individual that lives his life in pleasure, that lives his life carelessly, that trusts in his own wickedness, that turns to all the philosophies and counsels of the world. In the end, he's wearied. In the end, evil comes. In the end, the judgment of God comes. How are you living your life this morning? Are you living it for God? Living the way God wants you to live? Are you laboring for the Lord? Is he your trust? Is he your hope? You see, if you're dwelling in pleasure is a problem. Are we dwelling in the pleasures of God? The joy of God? Thou shalt make me full of joy with thy countenance, David said. Living carelessly. Are we living carefully? Living carefully before God? Seeking to honor him? Seeking to trust him? It said they trusted in their wickedness. Are we trusting in righteousness this morning? Are we living for God? Evil came upon them because they trusted in their things. But the Bible tells us that God works everything out for good to them that love him, to them that are called according to his purpose. Are we living for God this morning? One way leads to death and destruction. One way leads to life and righteousness. I trust you'll choose to follow God. It's the best decision you can make in your life. I'm so thankful that God loves us and cares for us. But he also will not be mocked. Let's be a people that live for God. Thanks to all of you come out. Thanks to you view the streams. We appreciate your support. Pray that you have a wonderful day in the Lord. Be prayed up, blessed up, and ready to go. Have a wonderful afternoon.